Unmasked, Episode 13, When No Doesn't Feel Like an Option. Sometimes, the most dangerous situations aren't the ones where you can't say no. They're the ones where you technically can, but everything in you knows you shouldn't. Because of the reaction, because of the pressure, because of what comes next. And that's the part people don't understand. They think consent is simple, black and white, yes or no. But what happens when no doesn't feel safe? What happens when saying no leads to guilt, anger, withdrawal, or punishment? What happens when it's easier to say yes than deal with everything that follows? This is a harder one to talk about, not because it didn't happen, but because for a long time, I didn't even realize what it was. When people think about abuse, they think about shouting, violence, control. But they don't always think about what happens behind closed doors, and sometimes right in front of other people, in the parts of a relationship that are supposed to feel safe. Sex is meant to be shared, mutual, something where both people feel comfortable, respected, in control of their own body. But that's not always what it looks like, and sometimes it doesn't look like abuse at all. At least, not at first, because it doesn't start with force. It starts with pressure, little comments. Why don't you want me? You never make the effort. Other people wouldn't say no. I have needs. And at first, it doesn't feel threatening. It feels like guilt. Like you're the one doing something wrong. So you give in. Not because you want to, but because it feels easier than the tension that comes with saying no. And that's where the line starts to blur. Because you're not being physically forced, but you're also not freely choosing it. You're being worn down. And over time, that becomes normal. You stop asking yourself what you want. You start asking, what will keep the peace? You start managing their reactions instead of listening to your own comfort. And that's not consent. Consent isn't silence. Consent isn't giving in. Consent isn't avoiding an argument. Consent is clear, willing, safe. And if any of those things are missing, then something isn't right. But when you're in it, it's not that obvious, because it's mixed in with everything else. The control, the manipulation, the emotional pressure. You're already being told you're too much, too sensitive, too difficult. So when it comes to sex, you don't feel like you have the right to say no. Or if you do say no, you're made to feel guilty for it. And that guilt is powerful. It makes you question yourself. It makes you override your own boundaries. It makes you believe your body is something you owe. And sometimes it doesn't stay private. Sometimes it happens in places where it absolutely shouldn't. At work, in front of other people, in environments where you're supposed to feel professional, safe, respected. Being touched without consent, groped like your body isn't yours. Comments being made about you, your body, your sex life, not just to you, but in front of staff, or worse, to staff, turning something deeply personal into something public, humiliating, exposing, and again, you freeze. Do you laugh it off? Do you challenge it? Do you risk what happens after? Because when you already know how someone reacts in private, you learn to manage them in public too, so you minimize it. You brush it off and you tell yourself it's not that bad. But it is. Because consent doesn't change. Depending on location, respect doesn't disappear. Because other people are around. And being in a relationship does not give someone the right to touch you, speak about you, or expose you in ways that make you uncomfortable. And over time, you disconnect. You stop seeing intimacy as something safe. You start seeing it as something expected, something you have to get through, not something you want. And that changes you. It affects how you see yourself, your body, your worth, your voice. Because when something that's meant to feel safe becomes something you brace yourself for, it leaves a mark. Even if no one else sees it, even if there are no bruises, it still matters. And this is the part people don't talk about enough, because it sits in that gray area where you question yourself. Was it really that bad? I didn't say no properly. I agreed. So does it even count? Let me say this clearly. If you didn't feel comfortable, if you felt pressured, if you felt like you couldn't say no, then your experience is valid. Full stop. Because consent is not the absence of no. It's the presence of yes. A real yes. Not one built on fear or guilt or pressure. And I know there are people listening who recognize this. Not because they're weak, not because they allowed it, but because they were put in a position where their boundaries were slowly taken away, where saying no didn't feel safe anymore, where their body stopped feeling like their own. And that takes time to rebuild, to relearn that you can say no, to relearn that you don't owe anyone access to your body, to relearn that intimacy should feel safe, not something you endure. So if there's one thing I want you to take from this episode, it's this. Your body is yours. Not sometimes, not conditionally, and not depending on someone else's mood. Always. And anyone who makes you feel otherwise is not showing you love. They're showing you control.